The dust swirled around Marcus Whitmore's worn leather boots as he dismounted from his black stallion outside the Riverside Saloon. At 35, Marcus had built an empire from nothing, transforming his late father's struggling ranch into one of the most profitable cattle operations in 3 states. His weathered hands, calloused from years of hard work before wealth found him, adjusted his hat as he surveyed the small frontier town of Cedar Creek. Money had changed many things about his life, but it hadn't changed the ache in his chest where loneliness lived. The saloon doors swung open with a familiar creak, releasing the scent of whiskey and tobacco into the evening air. Marcus wasn't much of a drinking man, but business brought him to town, and sometimes business meant enduring the company of men whose moral compass pointed in directions he'd rather not follow. Tonight was one of those nights. Thomas Brennan sat hunched over a corner table, his fingers wrapped around a half-empty bottle of rot-gut whiskey. The man's clothes, once fine, now bore the stains of too many nights like this one. His eyes, bloodshot and desperate, tracked Marcus's approach with the keen awareness of a man drowning in debt. "Whitmore," Brennan slurred, attempting to straighten in his chair. "Wasn't sure you'd come." Marcus pulled out the opposite chair but didn't sit. "Your message said you had something that might interest me. I'm here out of curiosity, nothing more." Brennan's laugh held no humor. "Always straight to business. That's what I respect about you." He took another swig from the bottle. "What I got ain't cattle or land, but it might solve both our problems." The saloon's piano player struck up a melancholy tune in the background, and Marcus found himself growing impatient. "Speak plainly, Brennan. I've got no time for riddles." "It's about my stepdaughter." Brennan's voice dropped lower, forcing Marcus to lean in despite himself. "Girl's 18, pretty as a picture, but she's gotten herself into trouble if you catch my meaning." Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors about Brennan's treatment of his late wife's daughter, none of them good. What kind of trouble? "The kind that shows in a few months, if you understand me." Brennan's eyes gleamed with a calculating light that made Marcus's stomach turn. "Girl needs a husband, and I need to settle some debts. Heard you've been looking for a wife." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd never made his desire for a family public knowledge, but in a town the size of Cedar Creek, secrets were harder to keep than cattle in a storm. "You're talking about selling your stepdaughter." "I'm talking about arranging a marriage that benefits everyone involved." Brennan leaned back in his chair, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. "You get a wife. She gets a husband to give the baby a name, and I get enough money to pay off the men who are threatening to put me in the ground." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. Several patrons turned to look, but one glance at his expression sent their attention elsewhere. "You disgust me, Brennan." "Wait, wait." Brennan scrambled to his feet, panic evident in his voice. "Just hear me out. The girl's got nowhere else to go. Her mama's dead, she's got no other family, and in her condition, what man's gonna want her? At least with you, she'd be taken care of." Against every instinct screaming at him to walk away, Marcus found himself hesitating. Not because Brennan's proposal held any appeal, but because the mention of a desperate young woman with no options reminded him too much of his own mother's stories. She'd been alone and pregnant once, facing a world that offered few choices to women in such circumstances. "Where is she now?" Marcus heard himself ask. Brennan's face lit up with what he must have thought was hope. "At the house. Been keeping her there since she started showing. Can't have her walking around town in her condition, you understand. I want to see her." The words came out before Marcus could stop them. Course. We can ride out there tonight if you want, but I'll need your word that you're serious about this arrangement." Marcus pulled a gold coin from his pocket and placed it on the table. "That's for your information, nothing more. If I decide to help the girl, it won't be through any arrangement with you." Brennan snatched the coin before Marcus could change his mind. "The house is about 2 miles north of town, just past the old mill. But Whitmore, the girl, she's not exactly grateful for what I'm trying to do for her. Might give you some trouble." Marcus was already walking toward the door. "If she gives me trouble, Brennan, it'll be because she's got more sense than her stepfather." The ride to Brennan's property took Marcus through countryside he knew well. These were the lands his father had dreamed of owning, rolling hills perfect for grazing that had been beyond their reach when Marcus was growing up poor. Now he owned twice as much acreage, but the irony wasn't lost on him that success had come too late for the old man to see it. The house, when it came into view, was a far cry from the modest home Marcus remembered from his youth. 2 stories of weathered wood and broken dreams, it seemed to sag under the weight of neglect. A single light flickered in an upstairs window, and Marcus found himself wondering if that was where she was kept. He tied his horse to the fence post and approached the front door. Before he could knock, it swung open to reveal a girl who couldn't have been much older than 20. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her simple dress couldn't hide the evidence of her condition. But it was her eyes that stopped Marcus cold. They held the kind of defiance that came from someone who'd been pushed as far as they could go. "You must be the rich cowboy my stepfather's trying to sell me to," she said without preamble. Her voice carried an education that surprised him, clear and articulate despite the circumstances. "I'm Marcus Whitmore," he replied, removing his hat, "and I'm not here to buy anyone." She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was telling the truth. "Then why are you here?" It was a fair question, and one Marcus wasn't entirely sure he could answer. Maybe because a young woman shouldn't be treated like property, no matter what her circumstances. Something flickered in her eyes, surprise perhaps, or maybe just cautious hope. "I'm Elena Rodriguez," she said finally. "And despite what my stepfather might have told you, I'm not looking for a husband." "Good," Marcus replied, "because I'm not looking to be anyone's solution to a problem they didn't create." Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her belly, and Marcus saw the gesture for what it was, a protective, maternal, fierce. Whatever had led to her current situation, she was already fighting for her child in the only way she knew how. "Would you like to come in?" she asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely comfortable with the invitation. Marcus glanced around the property, noting the broken fence posts and the general air of decay that surrounded everything. "Actually, I was hoping you might take a walk with me. These walls feel like they're holding too many secrets." Elena hesitated, then nodded. She retrieved a shawl from inside and joined him on the porch. Together, they walked toward the old oak tree that dominated the front yard, its branches reaching toward stars that were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "How long have you been living here?" Marcus asked as they settled on the wooden bench someone had built around the tree's massive trunk. "Since my mother married Thomas when I was 14, Elena replied. "She died 2 years later, and I've been his responsibility ever since." The way she said responsibility made it clear the arrangement had been anything but caring. "And the baby's father?" Elena's jaw tightened. "Gone. Made promises he had no intention of keeping the moment he found out about the baby." Marcus nodded, understanding more than she probably realized. What would you do if you could do anything? If circumstances were different? The question seemed to catch Elena off guard. She was quiet for so long that Marcus began to think she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but determined. "I'd find a way to support myself and my child. I can read and write, I'm good with numbers, and I'm not afraid of hard work. Before my mother got sick, she was teaching me to keep books for the local merchants." Elena looked directly at Marcus. "I don't need rescuing, Mr. Whitmore. I need opportunity." It was in that moment, sitting beneath the spreading branches of an old oak tree, that Marcus realized Thomas Brennan had made a fundamental miscalculation. He'd assumed Marcus was like other wealthy men who might see a desperate young woman as an easy acquisition. But what Brennan didn't understand was that Marcus had spent his entire life surrounded by strong people who'd fought for everything they had. Elena Rodriguez wasn't looking for someone to solve her problems. She was looking for someone to give her the chance to solve them herself. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Marcus was reviewing his ranch's quarterly reports when his foreman, Jake Sullivan, burst through the office door with uncharacteristic urgency. "Boss, you need to hear this," Jake said, his weathered face grim. "Just got back from town and there's talk about that Brennan situation." Marcus looked up from his papers, already sensing that whatever Jake had learned would complicate the previous night's encounter. "What kind of talk?" "The kind that involves Sheriff Morrison and some very angry men from the next county over." Jake removed his hat and ran his fingers through his graying hair. "Seems Brennan's been gambling with money that wasn't his to lose. Word is he owes nearly $3,000 to some folks who don't take kindly to being cheated." $3,000 was more money than most people in Cedar Creek would see in a lifetime, but it represented something far more dangerous than debt. Men had been killed for far less, and Marcus knew that desperation made even cowardly men dangerous. "There's more," Jake continued. "Heard from Doc Peterson that the girl's further along than anyone thought. Maybe 6 or 7 months, not 3 or 4 like Brennan's been claiming." The implications hit Marcus immediately. If Alina was that far into her pregnancy, any solution to her situation needed to happen quickly. More importantly, it meant she'd been hiding her condition for months, enduring whatever treatment Brennan had subjected her to while protecting her unborn child. "Saddle thunder," Marcus said, already reaching for his coat. "I need to get back to that house." "Boss, maybe you should think about this," Jake said carefully. "Whatever's going on with Brennan and that girl, it's not your fight. You start involving yourself in other people's family business, and it never ends well." Marcus paused at the door. Jake had been with him for over 10 years, had helped him build everything he now owned, and his advice was usually sound. But something about Alina Rodriguez had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't explain or ignore. "Sometimes a man has to decide what kind of person he wants to be," Marcus replied. "And I've decided I don't want to be the kind who turns his back when someone needs help." The ride to Brennan's property took on a different quality in daylight. Marcus could see the full extent of the neglect that had claimed the once prosperous farm. Fences lay broken. The barn door hung askew on rusted hinges, and weeds had overtaken what had once been carefully tended gardens. It was the kind of decay that spoke to years of poor choices and squandered opportunities. As he approached the house, Marcus could hear raised voices coming from inside. Brennan's slurred words were punctuated by Alina's clear, defiant responses, and the tone suggested their conversation was far from amicable. "I don't care what promises you made to whom," Alina was saying as Marcus stepped onto the porch. "I won't be sold like livestock to pay your debts." "You'll do as you're told, girl." Brennan's voice carried the ugly edge of a man whose patience had worn thin. "You think you got choices in your condition. You think any decent man's gonna want damaged goods." Marcus didn't bother knocking. He pushed through the front door to find Elena standing in the center of the main room, her hands protectively cradled around her belly, while Brennan loomed over her with the posture of a man accustomed to intimidating those smaller than himself. "Step away from her, Brennan." Both Elena and her stepfather turned at the sound of Marcus's voice. Elena's expression showed relief mixed with surprise, while Brennan's face lit up with what he clearly mistook for salvation. "Whitmore, perfect timing. I was just explaining to Elena here about the arrangements we discussed." "We didn't discuss any arrangements," Marcus replied evenly. "And from what I can hear, Miss Rodriguez has made her position clear." Brennan's expression shifted from hopeful to calculating. "Now see here, you can't just come into my house and—" "Your house," Marcus interrupted. "Jake tells me you're about $3,000 in debt to some men who don't negotiate payment plans. How much of this property do you actually still own?" The question hit its mark. Brennan's face paled and his bluster deflated like a punctured balloon. That's temporary, just a small setback." "Small setback." Elena's voice cut through her stepfather's excuses. "You've been gambling away everything my mother worked to build while keeping me prisoner in this house." Marcus studied the young woman's face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way she favored her left side when she moved. "Has he been hurting you?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," Elena replied, but the defiance in her voice couldn't quite mask the exhaustion. "That's enough," Brennan snarled, his desperation finally overriding his caution. "Both of you. Girl, you'll marry whoever I say you'll marry, and Whitmore, you'll pay what we agreed or get out of my house." Marcus had dealt with desperate men before, had seen how quickly desperation could turn to violence. But he'd also spent years learning to read people, and what he saw in Brennan wasn't dangerous determination. It was the flailing of a man who knew he was drowning. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said calmly. "Miss Rodriguez is going to gather whatever belongings she wants to take with her, and then she's coming with me." "Like hell she is." Brennan started forward, his hands clenched into fists. Marcus didn't move, didn't even shift his stance, but something in his expression stopped Brennan cold. "You can try to stop me," Marcus said quietly, "but I should mention that Jake Sullivan is waiting just outside with 4 of my ranch hands, and Sheriff Morrison should be along shortly to discuss your gambling debts." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses filled the air outside. Brennan rushed to the window, his face going white at whatever he saw. "You can't do this," he said, but the fight had gone out of his voice. "I'm not doing anything except giving Miss Rodriguez a choice," Marcus replied. "Elena, what do you want to do?" For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of an old clock on the mantelpiece. Elena looked from Marcus to her stepfather, her hands never leaving her belly, her expression cycling through fear, hope, and determination. "I want to leave," she said finally. "I want to leave and never come back." "Then go pack whatever you need." Alina moved toward the stairs, but Brennan's voice stopped her. "You walk out that door, girl, and you're dead to me. You hear? Dead to me." Alina turned back, and Marcus saw something in her expression that reminded him of steel being forged in fire. "I've been dead to you since the day my mother died, Thomas. The only difference is now I'm choosing to live." She climbed the stairs with quiet dignity, leaving Marcus alone with a man whose world was crumbling around him. Brennan slumped into a chair, suddenly looking older than his 50-odd years. "You don't understand what you're doing," Brennan said quietly. "That girl's got nothing but trouble ahead of her. Baby with no father, no family, no prospects. You think you're helping her, but you're just delaying the inevitable." Marcus moved to the window and watched Jake and the other men maintain their positions around the property. "The only inevitable thing here, Brennan, is that you're going to have to face the consequences of your choices." "And what about her choices?" Brennan's voice carried a bitter edge. "What about the choice she made to spread her legs for some smooth-talking drifter who disappeared the minute things got complicated?" The words hung in the air like poison, and Marcus felt his hands clench involuntarily. A man who judges a woman for finding herself in a difficult situation usually has plenty of his own failings he's trying to ignore. Alina's footsteps on the stairs ended the conversation. She descended carrying a single carpet bag that looked like it had seen better days, her chin raised with the kind of pride that Marcus recognized from his own mother's stories of hard times. "That's everything?" Marcus asked. "Everything that matters," Alina replied. As they prepared to leave, Brennan made one last attempt to assert control. "You'll regret this, both of you. That girl's carrying nothing but hardtack, and you'll see it soon enough." Alina paused at the door, her hand on the frame. "The only hardtack I'm carrying is the memory of how you treated my mother in her final months, but even that won't last forever." Outside, Sheriff Morrison was indeed waiting, along with two men Marcus didn't recognize but whose expensive clothes and hard faces suggested they were Brennan's creditors. The sheriff tipped his hat as Marcus and Alina emerged from the house. "Morning, Mr. Whitmore, Miss Rodriguez." Morrison's weathered face showed no surprise at finding them together. "I take it you won't be needing any assistance here." "No assistance needed, Sheriff," Marcus replied. "Miss Rodriguez has decided to accept employment at my ranch." It was the first Alina had heard of any employment, but she showed no surprise. Instead, she nodded politely to the sheriff and allowed Marcus to help her into his wagon. As they drove away from the house that had been her prison for 4 years, Alina sat quietly beside Marcus, her carpet bag clutched in her lap. It wasn't until they were well out of sight of the property that she finally spoke. "Employment at your ranch." Marcus glanced at her, nodding the way the morning sunlight caught the auburn highlights in her dark hair. "You said you were good with numbers and bookkeeping. My current system could use some organization." "And you think that's wise?" Hearing a pregnant woman with no references and a reputation that's probably ruined by now. "I think," Marcus replied carefully, "that reputation is something other people worry about. I'm more concerned with character." Alina was quiet for another mile before she spoke again. "Why are you helping me? And don't say it's because you need a bookkeeper. A man like you could hire anyone." It was a fair question, and one Marcus had been asking himself since the previous evening. The honest answer was complicated, involving his own childhood experiences, his mother's stories, and something indefinable about Alina herself that spoke to the part of him that had always been drawn to people who fought against unfair circumstances. "Maybe because I believe everyone deserves a chance to write their own story," he said finally. Alina studied his profile as he guided the horses along the familiar road toward his ranch. "And what if my story involves complications you're not prepared for?" Marcus smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt in longer than he could remember. "Miss Rodriguez, I built a cattle empire from nothing in country that tried to kill me at least once a week. I think I can handle whatever complications you might bring." The Whitmore Ranch sprawled across 15,000 acres of the most beautiful grazing land in 3 counties, but it was the main house that took Alina's breath away as they crested the final hill. Built from local stone and timber, it stood 3 stories tall with wraparound porches and large windows that caught the morning light like jewels. It was the kind of home she'd only seen in picture books, the kind of place that spoke of permanence and prosperity. "It's beautiful," she said softly, her hands unconsciously smoothing over her dress as if trying to make herself more presentable for such surroundings. "It's too big for just me," Marcus replied, and something in his tone suggested this was a source of ongoing loneliness rather than pride. As they approached the circular drive, Alina could see ranch hands going about their morning duties. Some paused in their work to watch the wagons approach, their expressions curious but not unfriendly. A woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on an apron, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. "That's Mrs. Patterson," Marcus explained as he helped Alina down from the wagon. "She's been keeping house for me since I built this place. Don't let her motherly appearance fool you. She runs this household with military precision." Mrs. Patterson approached with the measured gait of someone accustomed to being obeyed, but her blue eyes were kind as they took in Alina's condition and circumstances. "Mr. Whitmore," she said with a slight nod. "I wasn't expecting company." "Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Alina Rodriguez. She'll be staying with us and helping organize the ranch's bookkeeping systems." If Mrs. Patterson was surprised by this announcement, she didn't show it. Instead, she studied Alina with the calculating gaze of someone used to sizing up situations quickly. "I see. And how long might Miss Rodriguez be staying?" "As long as she needs to," Marcus replied firmly. Something passed between the housekeeper and her employer, a silent communication born of years of mutual respect. Finally, Mrs. Patterson nodded. "Well then, Miss Rodriguez, you'll be wanting the blue room on the second floor. It has the best light for working with papers and accounts." Alina felt a surge of gratitude toward the older woman for the matter-of-fact acceptance, the absence of judgment that she'd grown so unaccustomed to receiving. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I'm grateful for your kindness." "Kindness has nothing to do with it," Mrs. Patterson replied briskly. "This house has been crying out for proper organization, and if Mr. Whitmore says you're the person to do it, then that's settled." As Mrs. Patterson led Alina into the house, Marcus called after them. "I'll be in the office going over the books. When Miss Rodriguez is settled, perhaps she could join me to see what we're working with." The interior of the house was even more impressive than Alina had imagined. Rich wood paneling, carefully chosen furniture, and paintings that spoke of both wealth and good taste created an atmosphere of refined comfort. But it was the attention to detail that caught her eye: fresh flowers in every room, perfectly maintained surfaces, and the kind of cleanliness that came from genuine care. "Mr. Whitmore has excellent taste," Alina observed as they climbed the curved staircase to the second floor. "He has excellent credit with the finest merchants in 3 states," Mrs. Patterson replied dryly. "But I'll grant you, he's never bought anything just because it was expensive. Everything in this house serves a purpose." The blue room turned out to be a corner suite with windows facing both east and south, flooding the space with natural light. The furniture was simple but well made: a 4-poster bed, a writing desk positioned to take advantage of the morning sun, and a comfortable reading chair near the fireplace. "This is beautiful," Alina said, setting her carpetbag on the bed. "But surely this is too fine a room for an employee." Mrs. Patterson paused in her arrangement of fresh towels and gave Alina a look that seemed to see straight through her. "Miss Rodriguez, I've been keeping house for wealthy men for 30 years. I've seen all kinds come and go: gold diggers, social climbers, women looking to better their circumstances through whatever means necessary. You're not any of those things." "How can you be so sure?" "Because those women don't ask if a room is too fine for them. They ask if there's something better available." Mrs. Patterson moved to the window and adjusted the curtains. Mr. Whitmore is a good man, but he's been alone too long. Makes him vulnerable to the wrong kind of attention. You, I think, might be the right kind." Elena felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Patterson, I hope you don't think that I'm here under false pretenses. Mr. Whitmore offered me employment, nothing more. What I think, dear, is that the good Lord works in mysterious ways, and sometimes what starts as one thing becomes something else entirely." The housekeeper moved toward the door. "Now, get yourself freshened up and then go see about those books. Mr. Whitmore's been trying to organize that office himself for 3 years, and it's been painful to watch." Alone in the beautiful room, Elena moved to the window and looked out over the vast expanse of the Whitmore ranch. Cattle dotted the rolling hills like brown and black specks, and she could see ranch hands on horseback moving among them with the easy confidence of men who knew their business. It was a world completely foreign to her experience, but something about its vastness and purpose called to her. Her hand moved to her belly, feeling the strong kick of the child within. "What do you think, little one?" she whispered. "Think we might have found somewhere safe to land?" After washing her face and changing into her only other dress, Elena made her way downstairs to find Marcus's office. She heard him before she saw him, his voice raised in obvious frustration as he spoke to someone. "I don't care what the previous system was, Jake. If we can't track our expenses properly, we can't make informed decisions about expansion." "Boss, I understand that, but some of these receipts go back 2 years, and half of them are so faded you can't read them anyway." Elena knocked on the open office door, and both men looked up from what appeared to be an explosion of papers covering every available surface. "Miss Rodriguez," Marcus said, relief evident in his voice. "Perfect timing. Jake, meet our new bookkeeper." Jake Sullivan removed his hat and nodded politely, but Elena could see the skepticism in his weathered face. "Ma'am, hope you're better with numbers than the boss here." "I hope so too," Elena replied, stepping into the office and surveying the chaos. "What system have you been using?" Marcus gestured helplessly at the scattered papers. "System might be too generous a word. I've been putting receipts and invoices in boxes, and once a year I try to make sense of them for tax purposes." Elena picked up a handful of papers from the desk, noting dates that ranged from 6 months to 3 years old, expenses that ranged from feed purchases to equipment repairs, and handwriting that varied from barely legible to completely illegible. "This isn't a system," she said finally. "This is an archaeological dig." Jake barked out a laugh. "I like her already, boss." "The question is," Elena continued, moving to the large window behind the desk, "do you want to know where you've been, where you are now, or where you're going?" Marcus joined her at the window, and she caught the scent of leather and something uniquely masculine that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. I want to know all three. Then we start over. Elena turned back to the room, her mind already organizing the task ahead. We separate everything by year, then by type of expense. Once we know what you've been spending money on, we can identify patterns and plan for the future. That sounds like a lot of work, Jake observed. It is, Elena agreed. But it's also the difference between running a business and just hopping for the best. Marcus studied her face, nodding the way her eyes lit up when she talked about organizing and planning. How long do you think it will take? Elena considered the scope of the work before her. If I work steadily, maybe 6 weeks to get everything properly organized and create a system for going forward. 6 weeks, Marcus repeated, and after that. It was the question Elena had been dreading, the one that forced her to confront the temporary nature of this sanctuary. After that, I suppose I'll need to figure out what comes next. What if what comes next is staying here? The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither was quite ready to examine. Jake cleared his throat and moved toward the door. I'll leave you two to work out the details. Miss Rodriguez, if you need anything from any of the men, just ask. We all want to see this place run proper. After Jake left, Elena and Marcus stood in the paper-strewn office, the silence stretching between them like a bridge neither was certain they should cross. Mr. Whitmore, Elena began. Marcus, he corrected gently. Marcus, then. I want you to understand that I'm grateful for this opportunity, but I won't be anyone's charity case. If I stay beyond organizing your books, it needs to be because I'm earning my place here. Marcus moved closer, and Elena could see the sincerity in his dark eyes. Elena, I've been successful because I know the value of good people. If I'm asking you to stay, it's because I believe you'll make this place better than it was before, even with all the complications I bring. Marcus glanced at her rounded belly, then back to her face. Especially with those complications. This ranch has been missing something for a long time, something I couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was missing the sound of a family. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, emotions she'd been holding back for months threatening to overwhelm her. You don't even know me. You don't know what kind of person I am, what mistakes I've made. I know you stood up to a man twice your size who was trying to sell you like property. I know you've been protecting your child under circumstances that would have broken most people. And I know you look at a mess like this office and see possibilities instead of problems. Marcus gestured around the chaotic room. That tells me everything I need to know about what kind of person you are. Elena walked to the desk and picked up a faded receipt, using the moment to compose herself. What if people talk? What if having me here damages your reputation? Let them talk, Marcus replied firmly. I've never made decisions based on other people's opinions, and I'm not about to start now. And when the baby comes, we'll figure it out together. The word together hit Elena like a physical force. It had been so long since anyone had used that word in reference to her future that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to not face every challenge alone. All right, she said finally. Let's start with these books and see where that leads us. Marcus smiled, and Alina realized it was the first time she'd seen him look genuinely happy since they'd met. Where do we begin? Alina surveyed the chaos around them, feeling something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. We begin at the beginning, and we build something better than what was here before. Part 4. 3 weeks into Alina's tenure as the unofficial ranch bookkeeper, the Whitmore property had begun to transform in ways that went far beyond organized ledgers and properly filed receipts. The change was subtle but undeniable. Fresh flowers appeared in the main house's common areas. The evening meals became more elaborate affairs, with Mrs. Patterson clearly enjoying having someone to fuss over. And Marcus found himself looking forward to the end of each workday in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Alina had attacked the office chaos with the systematic precision of a military campaign. She'd created filing systems, established monthly expense categories, and instituted weekly review meetings that had already identified several areas where the ranch was hemorrhaging money unnecessarily. But more than her organizational skills, it was her presence that had changed the atmosphere of the entire property. Boss, I hate to admit it, but that girl's got a head for business, Jake said as he and Marcus reviewed the monthly cattle counts. She spotted that feed supplier overcharge that we've been paying for 2 years without noticing. Marcus nodded, watching through the office window as Alina walked slowly through Mrs. Patterson's vegetable garden, her hand resting on her increasingly prominent belly. At nearly 8 months pregnant, she moved with the careful grace of a woman learning to balance her changing body, but her energy and enthusiasm for her work hadn't diminished. She's got a gift for seeing patterns, Marcus agreed. Yesterday she suggested we adjust our breeding schedule to align better with market demands. Could increase our profits by 15% if her calculations are correct. Which they probably are, Jake observed. Woman's got a mind like a steel trap when it comes to numbers. What Jake didn't mention, but what both men were aware of, were the other changes Alina's presence had brought. The ranch hands had begun taking more pride in their appearance and their work. The bunkhouse had been cleaned and organized without being asked, and there was a general sense of purpose that seemed to radiate outward from the main house. Speaking of the lady, Jake continued, You might want to have a talk with some of the boys about keeping their opinions to themselves." Marcus looked up sharply. "What kind of opinions?" "The kind that come from men who spend too much time alone and think they know more about women than they actually do. Most of the crew respects Miss Rodriguez, but there's been some talk." "What kind of talk?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "The kind that questions a man's judgment when he takes in a pregnant woman with no husband. You know how it is, boss. People see what they want to see, and some of them want to see something that ain't there." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd been expecting this conversation, had known that Elena's presence would eventually attract the kind of small-minded speculation that plagued small communities. "Anyone in particular I should be concerned about?" "Billy Morrison's been running his mouth some. Nothing too serious yet, but he's been asking questions about Miss Rodriguez's situation that aren't really his business." Billy Morrison was Sheriff Morrison's younger brother, a man in his 30s who'd never quite managed to find his place in the world. He worked part-time for various ranchers in the area, picking up odd jobs and spending his earnings in the saloon. Marcus had employed him occasionally for fence repair and general labor, but had never been impressed with either his work ethic or his character.